Amid the bustling chaos of a local market, Peter, a young man with Down syndrome, was trying to keep his composure on his first day at work. The lively chatter of shoppers and the clinking of carts filled the air, but Peter's focus was on his tasks, determined to make a good impression. However, his resolve was put to the test when an irate customer began hurling cruel insults at him. The other shoppers watched in stunned silence, unwilling to intervene. What none of them realized was that a famous Hollywood actor stood among them, quietly observing. What he did next would leave everyone speechless. Before we dive into the rest of this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy heartfelt and inspiring tales, be sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a special story waiting for you tomorrow. Peter, a 21-year-old with a warm heart and boundless determination, was known for his infectious optimism. But beneath his cheerful demeanor lay wounds from his past. His childhood had been overshadowed by a own abusive stepfather whose harsh words still echoed in his mind. "You'll never amount to anything, boy. Don't even try." These cruel memories often haunted Peter, but they also fueled his resolve to prove his worth. Today, that resilience was on full display. Dressed in a neatly pressed uniform, Peter stepped into the market, his heart swelling with pride. Jack, the store manager, greeted him warmly. "Welcome to the team, Peter. We're glad to have you," Jack said with an encouraging smile. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best," Peter replied, shaking Jack's hand firmly. Eager to learn, Peter dove into his training, absorbing every instruction. From stocking shelves to bagging groceries, he paid close attention to every detail. His enthusiasm was evident, but so were the quiet remarks from some coworkers about his slower pace. "He's a bit slow, isn't he?" one whispered, unaware that Peter could hear. Peter chose to ignore the comment, focusing instead on proving his abilities. By the end of the day, he was exhausted but proud, having completed his first shift. As he bagged the final customer's groceries, a sigh from the line caught his attention. Peter glanced up, relieved to see the end of his shift in sight. What he didn't notice was the growing impatience of one particular customer watching him closely. The market's sliding doors opened with a hiss, and in walked Karen, a sharply dressed, middle-aged woman with an air of superiority. Her heels clicked loudly against the polished tiles as she marched down the aisle, her face already twisted into a scowl. "These stores can never get their act together," Karen muttered loudly, ensuring others could hear her displeasure. Grabbing a cart, she moved through the aisles with purpose, tossing items into it without care. Anyone who crossed her path, whether it was a child or a distracted shopper, was met with icy glares and audible huffs of annoyance. With her cart full, Karen approached the checkout. The line wasn't particularly long, but to someone as impatient as her, it might as well have been endless. She chose Peter's line, her eyes narrowing as she observed his careful, deliberate movements while he bagged another customer's items. "Is this a joke?" Karen muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. "How does someone this slow even work here?" When it was finally her turn, Karen slammed her items onto the counter, her frustration evident in every movement. Peter, maintaining his polite demeanor, greeted her with a timid smile. "Good morning, ma'am," he said softly. Karen responded with a sharp glare and a cutting tone. "Let's hope it stays good, but at this rate, I doubt it." "I don't have all day," Karen snapped, her sharp voice cutting through the hum of the market. Peter, visibly nervous, focused on scanning her items with painstaking care, double-checking the codes and bagging each item meticulously. But Karen's piercing stare bore into him, her impatient sighs and the relentless tapping of her fingers making every second feel heavier. "Is this going to take long?" she asked, leaning forward with exaggerated exasperation. "Honestly, it feels like I'm watching this in slow motion." Peter's cheeks flushed red, and his hands began to tremble. Determined to speed up, he worked faster, but the pressure only worsened his coordination. A package slipped from his hands, landing with a soft thud on the floor. Flustered, Peter crouched quickly to retrieve it, but Karen's biting commentary cut through the moment like a blade. "Oh my God, he can't even hold a bag," she scoffed, her voice rising loud enough for everyone around to hear. She glanced at the other customers, seemingly looking for validation. Peter, though hurt, pressed on, trying his best to keep going. But his breathing grew heavier, and his trembling hands betrayed the tears he was struggling to hold back. Karen crossed her arms, her glare unwavering. "Someone needs to do something about this," she said loudly, her tone sharp and condescending. "This is ridiculous. I don't have all day to deal with incompetence." The tension in the air thickened as murmurs began to ripple through the line. Karen, emboldened by the lack of intervention, took another step toward the counter, her finger now pointed directly at Peter. Her voice was laced with disdain as she sneered, This is unacceptable. You shouldn't be working here if you can't handle something as simple as bagging groceries. Who hired you? Was it out of pity? Peter froze, her words cutting deep. His hands shook as he tried to focus on the groceries in front of him. But the pressure only mounted, and another bag slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a soft but humiliating thud. "Look at that," Karen exclaimed, laughing sarcastically. "He can't even hold a bag. This is pathetic." Peter swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Memories from his childhood rushed back, unbidden. He saw himself as a small boy, sitting at a kitchen table while his stepfather loomed over him, shouting cruel words. "You'll never get anything right, boy. You're dead weight, and everyone knows it." The memory brought back the same ache in his chest and the overwhelming urge to shrink away. "I just want to help," Peter whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over Karen's tirade. Karen leaned closer, her tone dripping with mockery. "Someone needs to teach you how to do a real job," she declared. "You're holding everyone up." Her voice echoed through the store, drawing the attention of shoppers from other aisles. Some customers in line shifted uncomfortably, while others murmured quietly among themselves. A few even pulled out their phones, recording the escalating confrontation. Peter tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes brimmed with tears, but he fought desperately to keep them from falling. The humiliation was almost too much to bear. And then, suddenly, the sound of firm, purposeful footsteps approaching the checkout line cut through the tense atmosphere. Karen's tirade faltered as she turned to see who was coming. The market fell into an uneasy silence. The usual buzz of carts, chatter of shoppers, and hum of registers seemed to fade, leaving only the heavy weight of the moment. Karen's gaze remained locked on Peter until a figure stepped forward, interrupting her with an air of quiet authority. Every pair of eyes in the market was now trained on the checkout line. "This is an insult to my time," Karen exclaimed, throwing her arms up dramatically. "I can't believe I have to deal with this." The crowd was frozen, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. An elderly woman at the back of the line leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Isn't someone going to do something? That poor boy looks so lost." Her husband hesitated, offering only a reluctant shrug, but the tension was about to break in a way no one could have expected. "I don't know. We don't want to cause trouble, do we?" a man in the line muttered, hesitating to intervene. The tension was palpable, but Karen seemed blissfully unaware of the discomfort she was causing. Consumed by her indignation, her voice grew louder as Peter's patience visibly wore thin. The once welcoming atmosphere of the market now felt stifling to Peter, who glanced nervously at the faces around him. He was met with a mixture of judgmental, pitying, and indifferent gazes. The harsh fluorescent light above made his vision blur, amplifying his sense of vulnerability. Karen, oblivious to the unease of those around her, continued her tirade, her words cutting deep. "This is what we're paying for. This kind of service? He's way too slow. This is unacceptable." She made a deliberate effort to emphasize every word, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear her discontent. The weight of her words pressed down on the line like a heavy fog. Some customers avoided her gaze, pretending not to notice. Others exchanged uneasy glances, silently hoping someone else would step in. Peter, still trying to finish bagging groceries, finally mustered the courage to speak. His voice trembled, barely audible, but filled with sincerity. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm trying my best," he stammered. Karen turned sharply toward him, leaning over the counter with a look of pure disdain. "Trying? That's not enough, not for a job like this. People here have schedules to keep, and you're wasting everyone's time." Peter lowered his gaze, unable to respond. His trembling hands betrayed his growing anxiety, and another bag slipped onto the floor with a loud thud. Karen let out a cruel laugh, her voice dripping with mockery. "Oh my God, he can't even hold a bag. This is pathetic," she exclaimed. Around her, the customers began shifting uncomfortably. A young man pulled out his phone to record the scene, whispering to the woman beside him, "This is awful, but who's going to stop her?" The woman shrugged nervously, her eyes darting toward Karen. "She's so aggressive. I don't want to get involved," she replied uneasily. At the back of the line, an older woman adjusted her purse and took a tentative step forward. Her eyes filled with sympathy as they landed on Peter, but she hesitated, the weight of the situation making her pause. Meanwhile, Karen, emboldened by the lack of opposition, pressed on. "If you can't do this job, then go do something else," she declared loudly. "Someone needs to tell you that." Peter's breathing grew heavier as he struggled to steady his hands and focus on his task. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he kept his eyes fixed on the counter, avoiding Karen's piercing gaze. Across the store, Jack, the manager, finally noticed the commotion. He frowned and began making his way toward the checkout line, but was momentarily delayed by a customer asking for assistance. Karen crossed her arms, turning to the other customers in line. "Do you all see this?" she demanded, gesturing dramatically at Peter. "We're all being delayed because of him. It's absurd that someone like this is working in a fast lane." The murmurs in the line grew louder, but still no one stepped forward. The discomfort was almost unbearable. Near one of the aisles, partially hidden behind shelves, a man stood quietly watching the scene. Dressed simply in a plain shirt and jeans, he blended into the crowd, but his calm posture and unwavering gaze suggested he was carefully analyzing every detail. His expression was one of quiet contemplation, as though he had seen this type of situation before. Peter remained focused on his work, unaware of the man's presence, though he felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the unbearable weight of the moment was about to ease, though he couldn't imagine how. Karen, however, remained oblivious, her fury entirely directed at Peter. The market's tension was palpable, teetering on the brink of eruption. Then the man stepped forward, his movements deliberate and composed. He became more visible to the customers in line, and a ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Some began to murmur, sensing that something was about to happen. Peter, still focused on the counter, briefly lifted his eyes and met the man's gaze. The stranger's expression was calm yet reassuring, offering Peter a fleeting sense of solace. Karen was mid-sentence, her voice rising in pitch, when the man's firm yet composed voice broke through the air like a beacon. "That's enough," he said. The words echoed through the market, cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Karen froze, startled by the unexpected interruption. From across the aisle, the man walked forward with a confident yet unhurried stride. Though his steps were measured, they carried a weight that commanded attention. The customers whispered among themselves, trying to place the familiar figure. "Wait, is that him?" a younger man muttered, already recording on his phone. Karen, still trying to maintain her composure, turned toward the man with a mixture of irritation and confusion. "And you think you can just show up here and tell me how to act?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm, though there was a hint of nervousness. The man stopped a few steps away, his calm eyes locking onto hers. Though his demeanor remained composed, his presence was undeniably commanding. "I'm not telling you how to act," he replied, his voice steady and resolute. "I'm saying that what you're doing right now is wrong," Keanu said, his calm yet firm tone silencing the murmurs around him. Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Wrong? You don't even know what's going on here. I'm just stating the facts. This boy is holding everyone up." Keanu allowed a small smile, though the intensity in his eyes never wavered. "The facts? The fact is, he's doing his job, and you've chosen to humiliate him for it. There's a big difference between stating facts and using them as a weapon." The murmurs among the customers grew louder, but this time the attention shifted from Peter to Karen. Peter, frozen behind the counter, looked at Keanu with wide, uncertain eyes. He couldn't understand why this man had stepped in, but a wave of relief washed over him. Someone had finally heard his unspoken plea for help. Keanu stepped closer to Peter, his expression softening. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone gentle yet encouraging. Peter," the young man stammered, his voice trembling. Keanu nodded. "Peter, you're doing a great job here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He placed a reassuring hand on Peter's shoulder, as though transferring some of his own confidence to him. "We all have tough days, but those don't define who we are. Do you understand that?" Peter nodded slowly, his eyes welling up with tears. He couldn't find the words to respond, but the crushing weight he had felt the moments before now seemed a little lighter. Karen, visibly uncertain of her stance, crossed her arms and let out a short, nervous laugh. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this has nothing to do with you. I just want fast service, and he's clearly not up to the job." Keanu turned to her, his expression growing more serious. "I'm someone who believes in respect. It doesn't cost anything to be kind, and you've clearly lost sight of that." Karen scoffed, but her voice lacked its earlier strength. "I have the right to be frustrated. I'm wasting my time here." Keanu nodded slightly. "You absolutely have the right to feel frustrated. What you don't have is the right to take that frustration out on someone who's done nothing to deserve it, especially someone who's here to help." A woman in the middle of the line, emboldened by Keanu's words, spoke up. "He's right. It's not fair to treat the young man like this." Another customer closer to Karen chimed in. "We're all waiting in line and no one else is complaining. What makes you think you're different?" Murmurs of support for Keanu began to ripple through the crowd. Karen looked around, realizing the validation she had expected wasn't there. Instead, she found herself surrounded by disapproving gazes, with many customers recording the interaction on their phones. The energy in the market shifted completely. What had been a scene of oppression had transformed into an example of solidarity. Before leaving, Keanu turned back to Peter and smiled. "Keep being yourself," he said. "Who you are is already more than enough." As Keanu walked out of the market, the customers broke into applause. Peter stood behind the counter, still processing what had just happened. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he mattered. The echo of Karen's heels faded as she stormed out through the automatic doors. The brief silence she left behind was soon replaced by conversations among the customers. "She had no right to talk to him like that," an older woman remarked to the person next to her. "That was incredible," another customer replied, still in awe. "I never imagined someone like Keanu Reeves would show up here." Meanwhile, Peter remained frozen behind the counter, staring at his hands as if trying to comprehend how a moment of humiliation had turned into something so powerful. Jack, the market manager, finally approached and placed a hand on Peter's shoulder. "Are you okay, Peter?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Peter looked up and smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm okay," he replied. There was something different in his voice now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Keanu's words echoed in his mind. "Your worth isn't measured by how quickly you bag groceries. Your worth is who you are." Taking a deep breath, Peter returned to work, the weight he had carried for so long feeling just a little lighter. The customers in line treated him differently now. A woman handed him her items with a warm smile. "You're doing a great job, Peter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." An older man added as he paid for his groceries, "Hey, son, keep it up. You've got more courage than most people out there." These small but sincere gestures were like bricks rebuilding Peter's self-esteem, one kind word at a time. Across the market, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Customers chatted among themselves, many praising Peter or marveling at the power of small acts of kindness. A young woman, still holding her phone, approached Jack. "That was amazing. Did you see how Keanu handled everything? You should post this on social media. People need to know how incredible Peter is." Jack smiled and nodded, glancing at Peter, who was now working with newfound confidence. The market wasn't just a workplace anymore. It had become a place of hope and unity, where a single act of kindness had made all the difference. "I agree," Keanu said, his voice steady. "But right now, the most important thing is making sure he knows that." In an instant, the market felt less like a place of commerce and more like a community. Strangers who had been silently waiting in line just minutes earlier were now conversing like old friends, united by what they had witnessed. When Peter's shift finally ended, he walked to the locker room with slow, deliberate steps. Sitting on a wooden bench, he stared at his uniform, replaying the events of the day in his mind. For so long, he had felt invisible, as though people only saw his mistakes or his differences. But today, something had changed. Keanu's words echoed in his mind, igniting a spark of pride within him, something he had barely known existed. For the first time, he felt like he mattered. He thought of his mother's words from that morning, reminding him how important he was to their family. Now, for the first time, he was starting to believe it. Outside the market, Keanu Reeves walked calmly toward a parked car. He wasn't seeking recognition or applause. This was just another moment of doing what he believed was right. Before getting into the car, he paused and glanced back at the market one last time. A small smile crossed his face. He knew this moment wasn't about him. It was about Peter. It was about the way a single act of kindness and empathy could change not just the course of a day, but perhaps even a life. The impact of that day spread further than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, the video of Keanu defending Peter had gone viral, shared by millions around the world. Hashtags like #RespectForPeter and #KindnessMatters began trending, sparking conversations about the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Customers who had been at the market shared their first-hand accounts, inspiring others to reflect on the power of small actions. Peter, who had once feared being noticed, became a symbol of resilience and strength. The story's narrator concluded with a poignant reminder. Every day gives us the opportunity to be kind, to lift others up instead of tearing them down. No matter how small the gesture, it can have a profound impact. In the end, we all share the responsibility of creating a world where respect and empathy are the norm, not the exception. The following morning, as Peter walked to work, something felt different. The cruel words that had once weighed him down were now replaced by the encouragement and support he had received the day before. With each step, he felt lighter. When he entered the market, customers in the checkout line greeted him with warm smiles and kind words. "You're doing great, Peter," one woman said. "We're lucky to have you here." Peter smiled back, his heart full. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged. And in that moment, he knew one thing with certainty: he would never feel alone again. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more to share. Stories of hope, compassion, and resilience. Click the screen to explore more, and don't forget to subscribe for your daily dose of inspiration.